You know, when I'm playing through my favorite games, I find that I usually don't touch a lot of my catalog. Like, I find my habits generally fall into what I've heard called the 80-20 principle, where 20% of my games get 80% of my playtime and vice versa. In those games, you have stuff like Minecraft, the classic Need for Speeds, and a couple sim racers, but one that's taken up a lot of my time is the Forza Horizon series. I started playing Forza just over 8 years ago, and now I've been playing them regularly for the past 6. And I'm gonna be honest, they don't really do it for me anymore. And for the longest time, I wasn't exactly sure why. Maybe I had moved on from that kind of game, or maybe I just wasn't as invested in it as I was when I was younger. But I think I know the real reason. To figure that out, let's go back to the start of Forza Horizon, all the way back in 2012. Actually, let's go a little bit further.
But now it's official, we are in a recession. The research
It's 2009. The world is just starting to recover from the 2008 housing crisis. Obama is inaugurated as America's first black president, and Braun GP wins the F1 Constructors title in their first season. But among all that, we got this. Forza Motorsport 3 was released on October 22nd, 2009, to widespread critical acclaim. Forza Motorsport started as Microsoft's attempt at making a direct competitor to Sony's immensely successful Gran Turismo franchise, with both games being semi-realistic simcade racers with the focus being on track racing. However, there were some key differences in how Forza Motorsport and Gran Turismo approached this idea, and these differences would carry over into both the Motorsport and Horizon games, namely the customization, the AI, and a different kind of approach to physics. Let's break each of these down. The customization, as much as people now like to harp on Forza for not being super innovative in their approach, was a main focus in the early games, mainly because the people who developed the games were car guys themselves, so they thoroughly enjoyed the feeling of owning and building a car up to make it entirely their own. At this time, that really hadn't been done in a game like Forza. The only options you got in most games was stuff like the color and maybe a body kit, and its main competitor in Gran Turismo? Well, their newest release up to that point only let you change the color, rims, and add a wing, while Forza Motorsport allowed for wings, splitters, bumpers, side skirts, a vast of wheel and rim options, and a very in-depth and malleable livery editor that allowed for players to make practically anything they wanted, although that would later become more restrictive. Also, in Motorsport 3 and onwards, the ability to swap both engines and drivetrains was added, allowing the player to drastically change the handling characteristics and really most of the characteristics of practically any car. The AI was built from the ground up with a new approach to making a virtual racer. Now, normally, movement AI is built like any other piece of code, with restrictive and rigid lines determining how it should behave. If this, then that kind of statements. But the Forza development team had a new, kind of interesting idea: the Drivatar. Basically, what the AI would do is it would take the inputs of the player, whether it be braking, turning, accelerating, sliding, or anything else, and use it as training data along with the AI's spatial awareness of the track to begin training the AI to be more like the player, and in turn, be more realistic and more human. There's a great interview that Forza creative director Dan Greenawalt gave about how they made the original Forza AI, and how it changed over time, which I'd highly recommend checking out if you have more interest in that. The physics in Forza Motorsport were meant to be a fairly realistic simulation, but with arcade accessibility, or a simcade for short. Although as Greenawalt and my attempts at racing show, many players found the original physics to be too challenging to handle and made it far too difficult for casual players. so the devs implemented the toggleable assist to both counteract the difficult physics and to give highly skilled players an incentive to turning off all the assists and being awarded with extra credits after each race. Those were just a couple of the elements that made the original Forza Motorsport stand out from the Gran Turismos of the time. And this, along with the general quality of the titles, meant that they did very well both commercially and critically, with most claiming that there were two very particular high points in Motorsport 3 and 4. 4 especially was an amazing title for its day. It had a great physics engine, amazing graphics for a game from 2011, the best customization the series had up to that point, solid progression, car soccer, and Clarkson?
And that's not something you can say about many of their efforts from the last few years.
I've gone again. In the plums.
This game really had just about everything, and it is widely regarded as one of the best Forza Motorsport, heck, Forza games in the series, really. Seeing the level of success they got from their track racers, Playground Games decided to end the 360 console generation with a new project. Forza Horizon was a big departure from what the Motorsports had established up to that point. Instead of it being another track-focused racer, it was instead an open-world street racing game centered around the concept of a music and racing festival. It had a similar vibe to Coachella or Lollapalooza, but with the racing aspect drawing from games like Need for Speed or Midnight Club, minus the cops. I personally really like this idea as a basis for a racing game, and it appeals to me specifically even more, as I'm a musician, and I've heard some of my favorite songs now originally from playing this game, like The Power by DJ Fresh, Are You Mine by the Arctic Monkeys, or Blue Monday by New Order. Side note, yes, I know Blue Monday is an EDM, I just got confused after watching this video on its influence on the club electronic scene, and just kind of thought it might have worked. The Horizons also introduced a story into the game, which, while not super engaging or extremely necessary, it did make the world the game was trying to build come alive a bit more, and gave the player a bit more reason to keep playing the game. The game is actually pretty good at keeping the player engaged throughout the events, and its relatively short length rarely made the game feel like a grind. But after finishing up the story, you'd probably want to check out the multiplayer, which is really something the Forza titles have both excelled at and, at some points I'll talk about later, made the main focus of their games. The multiplayer in Forza Horizon is no different from that, although they did it in a very different way to every other Forza, where you could either join randomly made race or Playground Games playlists made by the game, or very easily join public lobbies that people set up for drag racing, infected, street racing, drifting, or what have you. The community was really a great part of the original Forza Horizon, especially thinking back to what people used to organize events in Forza. You didn't have Discord or the others to do that kind of stuff. You literally had to make a dedicated forum to it, or just message people on the Xbox 360. Now, as much as I like the original Horizon, I'd probably say it's actually my favorite of the series, it's certainly not without its problems. First of all, the physics can seem a bit off, especially coming from the Motorsports where the cars were much snappier and more difficult to drive. In comparison, Horizon 1 feels like the same cars have semi-slick tires on and floatier suspension. The game also featured some paid DLC, which I'm not that opposed to, especially when they were adding a decent number of cars to a game with a quite small roster when compared to Motorsport 4. It also wasn't without its own bugs or odd design decisions. Like, there were funny ones like the bunker, Carson, and Red Rock map glitches that were really funny to do in infected matches, but there was also stuff like the rewinds being allowed in Rivals, the glowing paint visual bug, and the occasional titanium tree. But outside of that, this is still a super fun game to play today, and I definitely recommend it to someone who hasn't tried it yet. Look up the Xenia emulator if you're looking to get it on PC, you should be able to find it there. Seeing the success of their first attempt, Playground Games decided to give us another installment, which we'd get in late 2014. Forza Horizon 2 was the second game in the series to be on the Xbox One, except for the disappointment that was Forza Motorsport 5. It was also ported to the 360, but that version was basically just a demo of the game with Horizon 1's physics put onto a smaller version of 2's map, and given a smaller car list. That was also the version that I played for a couple years because I couldn't afford an Xbox One until late 2018. But when I did get the actual game, I had a great time. In my opinion, it almost takes everything Horizon 1 did right and just does it a bit better. The physics feel better to play than Horizon 1, the graphics were way better, the car list is much larger, and they even added new features like the addition of tuning to the Horizon games, which Horizon 1 didn't come with, as well as drivetrain swaps, which you also didn't get back in 1, only engine and aspiration swaps. And they also introduced the new style of multiplayer lobbies, which, in one form or another, would basically be the standard for multiplayer on the Horizons going forward. The only reason it ranks lower than Horizon 1 to me are a couple relatively small things, like the music being a bit less interesting in my opinion. Like, there are definitely some great stuff still in there, like Nitrous by Nick Mulvey. We get mad with no words to say. We get mad waiting. Love Sublime by Tensnake and the legendary Nile Rodgers. And NRG by Duck Sauce. Although to me, the average song in Horizon 2 is just a little bit worse. And the changing of the old online system to me made the online 1 a bit more impersonal and 2 a bit worse, as you couldn't just kick out someone for ramming or being a d*** on the road. You had to deal with them like you would someone in NASCAR, except instead of a bump and run, it's more of a smash and dash. And the single player did start to take a back seat to the multiplayer. This would become a somewhat concerning trend going forward. But besides that, Forza Horizon 2 is genuinely a great game, and it's one that I see rated very highly by players that have been in the community for some time. I'd say that they gave Horizon 1 a proper sequel, but can they do it again? Horizon 3 is the game that, at least from the people I've talked to, is seen as the best one in the series. At least from what I've gathered. It's essentially the culmination of everything good about the previous 2 games put together, but with even more stuff. It had a massive map with extremely varied and detailed areas, and is also the only Horizon so far to be in the Southern Hemisphere, or more specifically, Australia. Shout out your boy Friendly Jordies. It had a massive car list with tons of regional cars like Holdens and Ford Utes, and it added a bunch of new features like the customizable events, as well as the introduction of custom characters. Yay! It also had what I'd say is the second strongest soundtrack of any Horizon game. It had the 1975, De La Soul, DMX,
X gon' give it to you. wait for you to get it on your own. X gon' deliver to you. Knock, knock.
And Justice? Any OST that features Justice immediately goes up in my book. Horizon 3, in my opinion, is probably the next closest contender for being the best Horizon, second only to Horizon 1 in my opinion. And most of you seem to agree that Horizon 3 is the best one. However, it isn't without issues. Horizon 3 did have a few, I guess you'd say, odd design decisions, like how they diminished the single-player campaign even further, making the main form of progression just leveling hubs to unlock new stuff. Or like how in online races your ability to win a playlist wasn't determined by how many races you would win, but rather how much drifting around every corner you could do to gain XP. This was also a thing back in Horizon 2, but you still had to win in order to actually get enough points to take the win for the whole series. Now, it didn't really matter. Speaking of online races, Horizon 3 was also what I would call the inflection point for the metas in Horizon games, going from unbalanced to ludicrous, with the lobbies starting to be filled with tons of cars that were either all built the same, or all literally just the same car, which usually consisted of a lightweight or low drag car, a swap to make the car all-wheel drive, and as much power as you could fit under the hood. This was mainly because of the PI, or Performance Index system, which made practically all handling upgrades cost a fortune in PI, which would instead be used to all-wheel drive or turbo LS swap your car. This meant that if you wanted to stay competitive online, you basically had to build at least a few cars this way. This basically started here, because back in 1 and 2, even if your opponent brought a much better car, you still had a reasonable chance of beating them purely by outracing them. That wasn't exactly the case in Horizon 3, at least not as much as 1 and 2. But outside of that, and maybe the really funny incident where the dev build of the game got leaked, Horizon 3 was still a great game, and probably the one I'd most recommend to someone who started with the later games because, in my experience, it's all downhill from here. Forza Horizon 4. Okay, I'll start with what Horizon 4 did well, what they did right. The game had the biggest car list of any Horizon, finishing off with over 750 cars. It implemented some great new mechanics like the custom route creator and the new seasons, and some notable ones like Super 7 and the Eliminator. It also had the biggest map of any Horizon up to then, and had the greatest elevation changes, making the map feel much bigger to play on. It also looked nearly immaculate. That's it. Those are all the positive things I found in my 190 days of playtime. You'd really expect more, but there's just not that many. Now let's get to the bad. Let's start with the small stuff. At launch, the game was in an absolutely abysmal state. Like I mentioned in the Decline video, you had issues of graphics on cars, poor collision physics with the map, and the infamous Goliath Infinite Money glitch. Then you had stuff that was implemented as genuine features that were just plainly terrible. Like how there wasn't any class-based rivals for the first 3 months, you weren't allowed to gift or sell any cars yourself and would have to use the auction house, and this really cool one. Horizon 4 was the first and so far only Forza to implement a ranked online lobby system. Sounds like a good idea, and it would have been if not for this bug, I guess, that if anyone on either team, yours or the opponent's, left or disconnected, which happened very often, neither team would get any points towards their rank, making it almost impossible to rank up. They later fixed this by making it to where no one gets any points. So then it's literally impossible to rank up. Thank you, Playground Games, very cool. Speaking of disconnects, this game had absolutely terrible online connections. Like, this footage of sitting in a loading screen is from a month after release. This is from a year after. This is from 2 years after. And this is from a couple weeks ago. The game has literally never worked. And that wouldn't be as big a deal if there was something to do in the single player. Shame there isn't. The best the game gives you are these little Horizon story missions, which can all be beaten in just a couple hours and add relatively little to the game. You had the expansions that were okay, but they were basically dead community-wise within just a couple months of release. You had the in-game music, which had some bangers in it, like you had some from Kendrick,
And I love myself. The world is a ghetto, big guns and dick inside. I love myself.
Greta Van Fleet, and A Tribe Called Quest. But they didn't really get much out of the group that they had paid for. Like, for those that listen to them, I'm guessing when you think of Anderson .Paak, you think of hip-hop inspired beats, jazzy instrumentation, and soulful vocals, like Come Down, Come Home, or Fly As Me.
Okay, now have you ever been with a player? Take you downtown where they treat me like the mayor. Take you to the crib where you take it upstairs.
Instead, we got this. You also had the awful physics that, when paired with a busted PI system, meant every car either felt like or was upgraded to ensure maximum understeer. And then it was the tuner's job to try and absolutely screw the car just to get it to turn into corners properly. And the meta, which hit its peak at Horizon 4, going so far as to have some of the best cars even locked behind DLC, effectively making it pay to win, like the Shelby Monaco or the Peel Trident, as well as the 4GT and EB110 that dominated S1 lobbies, the Lancia 037 and Lola race car dominating on dirt, of course until they were beat out by the Hoonigan RS200 on circuits and the Toyota Baja Welcome Pack edition on sprints. And later in the game, you have the absolute scourge that was the rear-wheel drive power build, a type of car purely designed to both annoy the driver and the drivers around as much as possible, and to be the fastest car on the vast majority of road tracks. And you want to know the funniest part? That's not even the worst part of Horizon 4. But to get to that, we have to talk about 5 because it might be even worse there. Horizon 5 is, well, I'd argue it's better than 4, but in the same way Nvidia says the 4070 Ti is better than a 3090. As in, not really. The improvements and differences I've seen between 4 and 5 are relatively few, especially when compared to the other games in the series. Now, granted, much of 5's development time was during the COVID lockdowns, so having it not be much better or different was sort of expected, if it didn't also take an extra year to develop. But when Horizon 5 finally did come out, how was it? Would I say it was better than 4? Maybe. I mean, the online works more of the time, and since that's the focus of the games now, I guess that makes it a bit better, but not by much. Like, I'll give Horizon 5 the fact that it implemented the fully customizable track creator, allowing people to make basically anything they could want, and the fact that they had a better launch than 4, but outside of that, there really wasn't much to write home about for me. The map was just okay. The seasons went from 4 very distinct environments to the rainy one, and the other 3, and the playlist started getting filled with recycled content. Oh, did I mention the playlists? They were implemented back in Horizon 4 as a monthly update that would also include a new car basically every week. One, they were a good way to add new content in, especially that we didn't have to pay for, but two, it was the only reason a lot of people were still playing for in 2020 and 21, which, to many, including myself, became very boring and monotonous very quickly. This meant that when I got to Horizon 5, and within a year, they were already starting to recycle cars that were in 4 but not 5 at launch as new cars for the festival playlist, it left me with a bit of a sour taste, and told me that even if I stayed with this game for a while, I'm probably not going to see much new. And why should I stay? Because then I'd have to deal with one of the worst parts of any Forza Horizon game, especially the last two. The Forza Horizon community. Now, when I say the Forza Horizon community is the worst part of the modern Forza games, I am being slightly hyperbolic. Really, the Horizon community is the biggest strength and weakness of a lot of the Horizon games, mainly because of how multiplayer focused they've gotten over time. Although in my experience, the Forza Horizon community in particular has been one of the more obnoxious and toxic communities, and this is coming from the racing game community as a whole, which, if you watch the video by Moses B on why he's actively trying to distance himself from the community, you'll see why the community as a whole, throughout all of racing games, hasn't been in the best state recently. I'd say the main reason for the Horizon series getting this kind of community is because of the game's continued push towards a more child and kid audience, with different things such as lower difficulty, easier access to plenty of exotic and crazy cars, and just trying to make the game seem more fun and accessible rather than unique or gritty in any way. That's also why you see a lot of the average Forza player jokes, followed by someone smashing their car into a wall at Mach 2. But it's not just the young casuals that are spawning this kind of toxic behavior. For any of you that saw the video by SP4 on the competitive racing community, which, yes, is a thing in the Forza Horizons, that's not just a motorsport thing, you'd know that in the competitive scene, there are a lot of people who aren't exactly the easiest to work with, especially when it comes to organizing events and joining up into groups in a game that already doesn't have the best online connectivity, which just makes the whole process even more frustrating. One thing I will say, for anyone that's just starting to get into Forza, but you do want to get into the more competitive or race-oriented side, I'll leave a link in the description to a Discord server to a group known as the Horizon Racing Academy, run by Cast Haste and his team, and they're a great group of dudes who will help you in progressing and becoming a better racer if that's what you're looking for. Forza Horizon really isn't in a good state right now. Literally, as I'm editing this video, it seems like I'm getting more and more proof of that, as many of the lead developers of the game recently left the team, and as of 2 weeks before the video goes out, they managed to somehow break a bunch of the leaderboards and just delete tons of times, while still leaving up all the ones that were hacked or done via altering the game. So I don't know how they screwed that one up, but yeah. But they also announced the Rally DLC, which I guess I'm excited for. I mean, I'm not going to buy it, but it'll look nice seeing other people try it out. Especially since we've already had a Rally DLC back in Horizon 1. Since, at least for the time being, I'm probably not buying another Forza Horizon game, I guess my last bit of hope in the Forza series as a whole goes in the new motorsport game that's coming out. Let's see what they can do with 5.5 years of development time, and hope they can bring something good out of it.